Hello, everybody, and welcome to the live stream. Sorry about the confusion up there. The UK's changed time zones. The US hasn't changed time zones, but I think everyone's figured it out and we're all here. So sorry to start a little bit later for those of you who are expecting to start usual time. A couple of housekeeping things, and we can get straight into the topics for today. And we're going to be talking bucket list cruises largely, sort of linked to something that's coming up for me. So this live stream was the last one we're going to be having for a couple of weeks, because I will be heading off to Antarctica this coming week. And so the next live stream, put a date in your diaries, will be the 3rd of December, which is a Saturday. And we'll be talking all things Antarctica there, which brings me on to the next point, which is thanks so much for everybody that joins the live streams. It's just so fantastic that so many people join the live streams. So many people watch it afterwards as well, which is great. One of the things I've been looking at doing is how can we shake things up a little bit on the live streams. This is the 47th live stream that we've done. And one of the suggestions we got, which I think was from Francis, actually, one of the channel members, had said, why don't we move to doing more themed or specific topic live streams? So we'll certainly experiment that when we start up again at the beginning of December. As I mentioned, we'll start with sort of expedition cruising and Antarctica, and then maybe I'll go out and ask what people want to do. Maybe every 3rd or 4th one we'll do as a general Q&A. Of course, that doesn't mean I won't answer any general questions. So we're going to talk bucket list cruises a little bit more today as a little bit of a focus, and already people have picked up on that and are talking about that in the chat. But I thought before I give you my list of bucket list cruises that I think are the 10 biggest cruises that one should be doing, I thought I'd start off by talking about one of the obvious ones, which is Antarctica. So I will start off with that and start off with Paul and Carol. Good to see you here, Paul and Carol. Paul and Carol, as you may know, those of you regular, have a YouTube channel with lots of stuff recently, of course, about all the cruises that they've been doing on various lines, Cunard, Princess, and so on. They also have a very interesting video. Well, I think it's interesting because about me. They have a very interesting series they've started where they start talking to various vloggers and bloggers. They did an interview with me when we were on Regal Princess. They've done one with Emma Cruises as well. Anyway, Paul and Carol, excited to see Gary the Joint Antarctica Cruises going ahead. I'm extremely excited because in reality it's only this past week that it became 100% certain when Uruguay opened. So it's been a bit hit and miss where it's going. And the question is, why did I choose Ponant Cruises for this particular cruise? So obviously there's a lot of options going to Antarctica, and I have been to Antarctica before in 2019, and that time I chose to go on Silver Sea, and I went on Silver Cloud. And the reason I chose Ponant and didn't go with Silver Sea is very much itinerary driven. So when I went to Antarctica, everyone was sending me messages saying, oh my goodness, you're on your trip of a lifetime. And I decided when I was there and I got those messages and I was standing on the deck, I think we were in Orne Bay, surrounded by these huge white mountains covered in snow. There were some whales that we'd been out watching who were breaching. And on the second outing of the day, the first outing, we'd been with all these gazillions of penguins and everything. And I decided to myself there and then that absolutely, Antarctica was so incredible, so remarkable that it would not be a once in a lifetime trip. And seriously, if you haven't thought of going to Antarctica, or you've never, or you've been once, you might agree, is there's something unlike any other cruise I've ever been on that really and people talk about it as well, going to Antarctica changes you. There's something just so incredible about seeing Antarctica that completely changes you. Anyway, coming back to Paul and Carol's question, why Ponant and why this particular cruise? The reason being is when I went, most of the Antarctica cruises go to the Antarctic Peninsula, which is down on the sort of the mass main part of Antarctica, and they go from a shire, and there tends to be a 10-day trip, 1 or 2 days crossing Drake Passage. Then you spend time on Antarctica Peninsula, with 1 or 2 landings a day or 1 or 2 RIB trips a day. Only 100 people at any one time are allowed on land, so you alternate. And then they head back to a shire and they do that whole process through the season, which runs from November to February. However, I decided that I wanted to go and see South Georgia. I wanted to go and see South Orkney. South Georgia is where you have these huge penguin colonies, up to 200,000 or more penguins of different types of penguins. So often if you're watching the natural history programs, they will often cover South Georgia. Then South Orkney, which is about, I think, 90% covered in glaciers, which is a big whaling station, as well as seeing the Antarctic Peninsula. Now, Silversea used to do an itinerary, but they weren't offering that last year, which is when I originally booked this. So I looked at different options. I looked at Ponant, Hurtigruten, and so on, Quark, people that have been down there a long time. And I chose Ponant. First of all, because Ponant are very much, although they're kind of a luxury cruise line, they're extremely focused on expedition. So all of their ships are designed for expeditions. All of their ships are kind of ice class ships. And they really have a lot of experience there. So they have a lot of reputation for having a lot of experience, know the area very well, have very good expedition teams. Also is a very nice line. I haven't traveled on it, so I'll tell you afterwards if it is. So if Silversea had offered it, I would probably have gone on Silversea because I was very impressed with the service, the ships, and the expedition team. One of the fundamental things is you want a great ship that you want to go on, and you want a phenomenal expedition team. They are absolutely critical. So that's the reason I chose it. And so originally I was supposed to do it in 2020, and it got rolled over. Of course, once I come back, I'll give you a better perspective on whether that was, that was the right thing to do. But I'm pretty optimistic around that. So a couple of other key things around Antarctica and the planning. As I was saying, I only found out literally this week that was all finally ahead. So it's been a bit of a rush in terms of getting all my gear out. Now, luckily, because I've been to the Arctic, been to Antarctica, I have all the gear to take. So that was less critical. So hopefully that's answered that question on why. So one of the other questions, which is also on my bucket list, that I'll come to in a second, was around Queen Mary 2. And I see if I can find the question. I can't find the question, but I will see if I can. I'll see. Oh, here we go. Someone asked a question about Queen Mary 2, and were any changes done on Queen Mary 2? So I can't find the question, so I'll talk about it. And doing a polar cruise is one of the absolute things I have on my bucket list, and I recommend everyone has on their bucket list. Arctic or Antarctica is a question I often get asked. So if I could only go to one of those, I would actually go to Antarctica. The Arctic is amazing. It's fascinating. It's also slightly depressing in many ways because you see the impact of global warming there quite dramatically. Of course, you get a chance to see polar bears, but Antarctica is just so phenomenally different and unique, and you get to see penguins, which is fun. So that's the one. The second one was around Queen Mary 2. And someone had asked the question around were any changes done to Queen Mary 2 in their recent dry dock. So they went into dry dock, was it last month or the month before? But it was mostly a technical dry dock. So if you've seen the pictures online, it was mostly that all the exterior's been painted again, all the hulls been painted. So it was really more of a technical than an internal. The only key change that was made internally to the ship was the spa. So the spa has been stripped out. It was Canyon Ranch. It's now been changed to the new supplier, whose name I forget offhand, which has already been installed on Queen Elizabeth and Queen Victoria. So that was the only key change. But that is my second, bucket list cruise that I think everybody should do at least once, which is a transatlantic on Queen Mary 2. I've been lucky enough I did it on the original QE2, which was great to do just in terms of the whole experience of being the QE2. But the time we did it, which is in 2005, by then the ship was a little bit run down and whatever, and we kind of expected this very glamorous thing, and you got on the ship was all a bit rusty, and not rusty is a bit exaggeration, but it wasn't quite as magical as I expected to be. Queen Mary 2, of course, it's a newer ship, although it's getting a little bit older now, designed for the whole experience. Cunard absolutely understand transatlantics phenomenally well, and they know how to run a transatlantic. It's very different to a repositioning cruise versus transatlantic. And I've been asked many, many times, and I will be working on a whole video around repositioning cruises versus transatlantic, because I do get asked that an awful lot. Lots of people talking about Antarctica. Sarah, hello Sarah. Sarah, as you know, is my travel agent who talks about Antarctica. We had a little chat about that. I didn't actually book Antarctica through Sarah. Before I worked with Sarah, I booked that through a company called Polar Routes, but Sarah, I know, handles lots of Antarctic stuff as well. So that is, I'm just trying to see if there's any other questions around bucket list cruises, because I'm going to come on to that, because I do want to come on to that. There's lots of questions around Ponant. So that's one of the key things I will be talking about, by the way, is one of the experiences on Ponant, because that is something I will be covering. One thing I'm a little bit nervous about, I guess, is Ponant obviously is a French cruise line. Their ships are bilingual, but of course, depending on the cruise, you could find yourself with a lot of French speakers. They do actually they run with the expedition team. They will run, the expedition team, when you go on your RIBs, want to land, you have English only speaking expedition crew. But it'll be interesting to see how that shakes down. So I've been, for example, across Europe on a river cruise where there's literally been 3 kind of first language English speakers. So that's going to be one of the interesting things. I'm going to be on the ship for 3 weeks, so hopefully that really works. That really works out. So let's have a look. Ryan, I haven't been on Lindblad to South Georgia. This will be my first trip, and I haven't been on Lindblad at all. Lindblad is one I did look at, but less so. Lindblad, again, is a little bit more, I guess, true expedition rather than luxury expedition. They have a partnership with National Geographic. So I think I'm right in saying a lot of the National Geographic trips are linked with Lindblad. So that's definitely good. So, so Jackie, pick up my point on the Queen Mary 2 transatlantic flying to London in 2022. Perhaps I can take it back from the US to Southampton. That's what a lot of people do. I mean, if you book a transatlantic on Queen Mary 2, you have a flight included in that. So it's an economy flight, whichever way you're not going. So you're absolutely right. You could book a package through Cunard, and they would include the flight back. So one of the things I would say with the transatlantic is I do like going Southampton to New York way. The reason being is that you're going kind of against the time change, or with the time change. So actually what you do many of those days, so certainly I think it's 5 of the 7 days, you have a longer day because you're now adjusting time, because there's of course a 5-hour normal, as we learned, not always, normally a 5-hour time distance between Southampton and New York. And so you adjust time, so you have a longer day. When you're coming the other way, you have shorter days. So normally at lunchtime, you lose an hour every day, whereas you have an hour extra theoretically every day. And it's great in terms of jet lag and stuff. So definitely doing it that way around is fantastic. So I saw another question around, Daniel, I'll come to a question in a second around booking versus travel agent, not travel agent. But I will talk a little bit about Alaska, because Alaska is another one that is also, I would say, was always on my bucket list. And I strongly recommend being on people's bucket list if you haven't done Alaska. Alaska is and was one of those cruises where I had high expectations. And when I went to Alaska, it beat it. And it's not many destinations that you have that can always beat something that you expect. So I went on Holland America. And the reason I chose Holland America at that time was because Holland America have been in Alaska the longest. So that's the reason I chose Holland America, because they have been there something like 75 years or something. They bought a company that started cruising. Princess is the other cruise line that's been there a long time. I think I'm right in saying it's 50 years, or they're probably a little bit over 50 years now. And Princess is actually what I'm doing next year, cruise that I booked with through Sarah, on Majestic Princess, again, one that was carried over from 2020. So we're talking about the Inside Passage. So Inside Passage, as Gail was saying, I would recommend is fantastic for your first cruise to Alaska, because you get to see, you first of all, it's a smoother sailing, if you're worried about that, but you wouldn't worry too much about that. But you get to go to see, particularly if you're going on a line like Princess on America, some of the others, you get to go into Glacier Bay, see some of the phenomenal glaciers. You get to see Juneau, Skagway, and Ketchikan, so the real classic places. What I'm doing, so I would say I agree, Inside Passage is a phenomenal first cruise. Good idea though, which people recommend, is try and add an add-on like a land stay, because you're obviously seeing a relatively small part of Alaska. Adding a stay before or afterwards, where you go and get to see more like Denali and so on, and particularly if you book through Holland America or Princess, for example, they own their own lodges and trains and all sorts of things. On this next cruise that I'm doing though, because shaking up kind of the bucket list, if you like, in Alaska, is I'm doing the kind of the one way. So you can also do the one way, which goes from Anchorage down to Vancouver or Vancouver down to Anchorage. The advantage of that, you do call on some of those classic places like Skagways. You can do the great White Pass train and stuff like that, which is an amazing part. You can go up on glaciers and go dog sledding and stuff, but also you get to see some of the other glaciers and stuff that you won't see on the other way around. So let's have a look. I'm trying to see if I can pick up any others which link to bucket list. Francis, picking up on the bucket list point, is I may do a bucket list ports in 2023. I've long wanted to see Mauritius. Not sure why, just appeals to me. My 2020 trip that would have called there was cancelled. Any experience in Mauritius? Francis, yes, I've been to Mauritius. I haven't been to Mauritius on a cruise, but you're right. Mauritius is often part, particularly of a world cruise, which is I sort of didn't put on my list of 10 that we will work through my bucket list. It is actually on my bucket list to do a full world cruise. Mauritius is a beautiful place to go to. There's some amazing things to see. There's great beaches, obviously. They have an incredible botanical garden there, which is really magical with these massive, huge, big lilies and things. But it's one of the most interesting botanical gardens. I'm not a big gardening botanical fan, but certainly it is definitely very interesting. Bookhaven talking about the Northern Lights. On a bucket crew, we didn't hit the worst of the storm last year, never saw them. Do you think it's another try? If so, best. So definitely, the Norwegian fjords, and when I was doing my list, is Norwegian fjords kind of floats on and off the list. But, if you're going past 10, I do put Norwegian fjords on the list. And for a couple of reasons, one of which Norwegian fjords is a remarkable place to see, calling in and sailing in and all of those tiny little towns in the middle of the fjords. The fact that you're sailing so far inland. I think I ran sailing one of the sailings in was it Skålden? I can't remember. We were something like 80 kilometers inland on a big ship, and you're still sailing through there. But you're right, also going to the Northern Lights, absolutely remarkable experience. Now, the Northern Lights, it varies a little bit in terms of time. One thing I would say, though, is if you booked with some cruise lines, they offer a guarantee on the Northern Lights. So what they basically say, if you don't get to see the Northern Lights, you can then go again with them. So Hurtigruten, for example, on various cruises at various times of the year that I've seen, will offer that kind of guarantee. So Northern Lights, a lot of people tend to go. What I've seen actually, where a lot of them advertise, particularly the beginning and end of the sort of the season. So, for example, I think towards the end of last year, September. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear those fireworks going off. So that sort of time of the year, the Northern Lights are sort of happening now, but you can't get many Norwegian fjords cruises now at this time of the year. So it tends to be beginning and end of the season. So lots of cruise lines, particularly out of the UK, will go out to the fjords and offer those. But often I would strongly recommend looking at things like Hurtigruten, for example, which do go much further north. So one of the guarantees of seeing the Northern Lights is going really right up north past Tromsø. A lot of the Norwegian fjord cruises that go out of the UK don't go quite as far as that. But there are a couple. I've got to think that Saga out of the UK might also have offered a kind of a guarantee on the Northern Lights. So let me pick up the Sarah's raise another one that's on the bucket list, which is to the Galapagos. Absolutely, Galapagos is one that's on my bucket list, and I haven't done yet, but I will be doing next year. Getting confused with my years. And that one I'm doing actually on Silver Sea, on Silver Moon, one of their new ships. So Galapagos is one of those. Again, I think it's a little bit like the going to Antarctica. It's just so distinctive. It's so unique. It's so different. You have all this incredible wildlife that's very distinctive there. And again, a little bit like Antarctica, which has the International Antarctic Treaty. Ecuador has very strict rules around who can sail there, how many people can go on land, what size ship can be there, the environmental impact of ships and people and a lot of stuff, plus of course the wildlife. So there are a whole range of options there. So the international lines are mostly focused around Celebrity, which have their new Flora, which looks very interesting, and Silver Sea, which have their Silver Moon now. Celebrity also has some other ships, and so does Silver Sea have some other ships. So those are two new ships. It's very interesting because both of it's a bit like Antarctica. It's quite an expensive trip to do, again, because they're smaller ships and it's quite a long way to get there. There are then some more smaller independent providers as well. And I think I saw like Aqua are launching there, and a few other companies are launching there. It was very interesting, as an aside, is I did a comparison. I was looking at both Celebrity Flora and Silversea Silver Moon. Actually ended up Silversea being cheaper than Celebrity, which is not what you would normally would expect. So Peter making a very strong point about the trouble is there's so many wonderful places in the world to see, and sadly only time and purse to hold you back. And that is absolutely true. And one of the things that philosophies kind of I have when it comes to the bucket list is, you're right, is time and money are the two things that hold you back. And my aim is like we also don't know how much time, this is my philosophy on life. We also don't know how much time we have around, being a little bit dramatic, on the world, as it were. We just don't know how much time we've got. So my goal is why I'm around, I'm going to do as much as I possibly can. So that's why I'm a little bit obsessively working through the bucket list, and we're slowly going through this. I'll come to this in a second. And also why I'm trying to make sure that I find ways of making sure that I've planned and find the money to do it and find ways of doing it, which is not always as easy. But I agree with you. There's time and money, and time is such a valuable commodity. I saw a discussion a little bit earlier around retiring or retiring. One of the things that I've done, again as a little aside, is when I was about 30, 28, just before I was 30, one of the best piece of advice I ever got from anybody was the managing director at my time, managing director of the company I was working in, which was Johnson & Johnson at the time. And he was about 60 at the time, which of course when you're 28, you think it's really old. Now when you're that sort of age, you don't think that. But we're doing like one of those, what they called off-site, strategy things. And he'd said to me, what's your next career going to be? And I remember thinking at the time, is he trying to tell me something? Is he suggesting that I should be moving on? And the point he made was around, if all goes well, the average age that you live to is on this world is 80, 82, whatever it is. But many people retire at 60, 65, certainly at that time. So you've got 20 years of your life. And of course, when you're 28, 20 years is a huge amount of time. And he kind of said to you, so what are you going to do? And that was the thing that got me planning and starting around thinking, I want to make sure I use a lot of my time. So coming back to the point you were talking about time and money. So I'd always then, from that minute onwards, decided that I was going to retire when I was 55, which when you're, again, 30, it seems really like old. And I, from then, worked to make sure that I could do that, and then I could sort of keep traveling and stuff. So anyway, most people do it by spending their kids' retirement. Luckily, I don't have kids, so I can spend my non-kids' retirement. Jody, giving a nice segue into what is also very high for me as a bucket list, which is Panama Canal. So anyone who's been on one of these live streams before or has watched my channel probably knows that I absolutely am very passionate about the Panama Canal. It's very high on my bucket list. And so I'm going to answer this question in a second, Jody. Let me talk first of all why I think Panama Canal should be on everyone's bucket list. If anyone is interested in cruising, which everyone here is the Panama Canal is just such a fundamental icon. It's such a fundamental contributor to the whole marine world, both cruising, but of course cargo. It also is also one of the most remarkable things ever built. So cruise ships themselves are remarkable things to have been built. They're just the fact that they float and whatever, and just the whole thing around them. But the Panama Canal, when it was built and opened in 1914, thousands, I think it's something ludicrous, like 20,000 people died building the Panama Canal, partly through kind of ignorance around, basics of things like malaria, and it was yellow fever being spread by mosquitoes and stuff, but also just the pure graft of it. But it is this incredible, certainly the existing canals, they opened in 1914, now basically they're still there operating as they were. So sailing through these and just seeing the whole logistics and how they work, and just that, these massive cruise ships, which are certainly in the old canals are limited to certain size, Panamax size. You're talking like a Holland America, New Amsterdam, Cunard, Queen Elizabeth, that sort of size ship. But just going through is phenomenal. So sorry, we went off on a little bit of tangent there. But Jody, so when's the best time on which cruise line do you suggest? So let me answer the second one first. So in terms of cruise lines, the really critical thing to focus on is there are now two sets of canals. There's the original canals, although we call it the canal, but there's actually two canals because, well, first of all, there's not one canal anyway. There's two separate canals when there are actual locks, one heading that way and one heading that way. So that's one point. And also that whole stretch of the canal is a series of locks, a massive big lake and a series of locks. So it's not just a big long canal anyway. So you have the old canal, but then you have the new canal, which were designed to take much bigger ships, largely designed to take larger container ships. So when you're looking for the Panama Canal, first of all, make sure that the cruise line you're choosing and then the ship that you're choosing is going through the old canal. So some of the bigger, newer ships will go through the Panama Canal, where they move from the East Coast to the West Coast, perhaps repositioning after they've been up in Alaska. But they go through the new canal because they're too big. So really make sure that you're going through that. In terms of cruise line, it doesn't really matter then which cruise line you go on. You just need to make sure you're on the right sized ship. And the reason I say that is the experience going through is pretty much the same. So you're going to go through the same set of locks, the Gatun Lakes, the Miraflores locks, the San Pedro. I think that's right. Locks. You're going to do the same locks. You're going to have the same experience. They will also bring on board experts who know the Panama Canal and do commentary. And so the experience is basically the same. So wouldn't worry about that. So it's more cruise line that you like. Personally, I do tend to lean towards cruise lines that have a heritage of being pretty good on the whole enrichment side, because then you're going to have speakers coming on board who know the Panama Canal. You're going to have that. They're going to be really a little bit obsessive about the Panama Canal. So they're going to do lots of events and things around the Panama Canal. It's much more in their DNA. So I have done it on Cunard, which is fantastic. I've done it on America, which is fantastic. And my next one, which I'm doing in February, which I'm beyond excited about, is I'm doing it on Oceania Serena, so one of their smaller R-class ships. So this will be the first time that I've been through the Panama Canal on a smaller ship, which is about 600-700 people, versus the 2,000 ships. It's going to be a smaller ship going through, which means you're even closer to the locks. And also I'm doing it the other way, so I'm heading from Panama City through. So anyway, so that's a long way of answering your second question. In terms of the best time, you're a little bit limited, not entirely limited, but the Panama Canal options are highest around the time you're going to have the most amount of choice in the early start of the year, sort of February, March time. You have a lot of choice because a lot of ships that are doing world cruise legs are heading through the Panama Canal. So you can have a large choice of cruise lines. They're going to be heading the full way through, a full transit all the way through. You're often going to find at the end of the Alaska season, when ships are coming back from Alaska and heading through into the Caribbean, they're coming that way through. So you can have a lot of choice then. So that's sort of Octoberish time. But you will find pretty much during the rest of the year, there are ships that sail out of Fort Lauderdale and Miami that will do Panama Canal. The only downside with those is, although you can do them any year round, they only do a partial transit. So they'll go up to the Gatun Lake and they'll turn around and come back down. However, all of them will offer an excursion where you can then go on a small little boat. Well, it's not that small, a couple hundred people, 200 people, which will take you the full way down, and then you get a bus back and catch up with the ship. So sorry for going on a little bit too long, but as you can tell, I'm really a little bit upset around that. Obsessed. So lots of people have done the Panama Canal and the tip on the old canal. It's a pleasure doing that. There's actually a book which I won't get up and reach. There's a very good book which maybe I'll do in my next video when I do about Panama Canal, which is really worth reading before you go through the Panama Canal, because it also a couple of interesting videos about how the new Panama Canal is much more environmentally friendly and all that sort of stuff. She was saying, I love Oceania. I'm a very big fan of Oceania as well. So someone spoke about, here we go, Myanmar. It's not quite Beth. Hi, good to see you again, Beth. So bucket list for me is the Black Sea and a cruiser would stop in Myanmar. That's not on my list of the 10. However, and I know why why it is. I'm going to do a little segue, Beth. I'm afraid I'm going to steal your slight segue there to give one thing that is on a bucket list, which we don't speak about enough. And actually, I will actually make sure one of our future live streams is around. Sorry, just throw my pen away. Sorry. Which is actually around river cruising, much more river cruising, both in Europe and river cruising across in Asia. But sad news this week, which is why triggered by Myanmar, is Panda Cruises, which were the real pioneers in opening the Mekong, in many ways opening trips through Myanmar. They closed down. COVID eventually just meant they couldn't keep going. And they've been going for something like 27 years, which is very sad. However, my segue, which is on my list of bucket lists, is around going to a Mekong river cruise. And the reason for that is you go through Vietnam, you go through Cambodia, and you get to see a very different type of life in what is a very interesting part of the world. Like Cambodia, a very strong kind of communist kind of country, but incredibly interesting approach to agriculture and culture and phenomenal buildings. The Royal Palace complex is phenomenal. Vietnam is fascinating and stuff. So that is on my list. So Black Sea is one thing I should actually really probably have on my list. So let's have a look. Scroll back because I've kind of jumped. I want to try and make sure that I try to see if I can find other good segues into my list here. There's a couple of questions around the Finland. And okay, let me touch on this one. Spotify goes to Finland to Lapland across the Arctic Circle and then take the train back down a couple of stops. So definitely, Sherry, I think any of these kind of trips that get you up into one of these polar regions is absolutely phenomenal. I feel like I probably didn't do the Arctic part enough. Rara. Finland, I would say, if you ever do go on a Baltic cruise, which is sort of, it's getting on my top 10, although it's high, as people said earlier, it's high. The Baltics is an amazing cruise, and you do get to go to Finland, but you only get to go to Helsinki. But to Sherry's point, if you go much further north in Finland, much further up, close to the Russian border, there is an amazing amount of stuff to see, both in terms of if you go in winter with the whole winter lifestyle there, but also in the summer, you can go things like hiking with the husky dogs. So to keep the dogs fit and enthusiastic, we went hiking in Finland with a husky, which basically pulls you up. It is pretty amazing. But getting anything that gets you up into the Arctic Circle is just absolutely phenomenal. So let me segue. Let me talk about. I'm keeping an eye on the questions, and I do know there's lots of questions I'm not ignoring. I will definitely come back to those questions. I wanted to find the one I had about Iceland. Somebody was talking about Iceland, and I think it was the beginning. I think it was Jeffrey at the beginning. I can't quite find it. So I will just segue myself into Iceland. I think it was Jeffrey was asking. Jeffrey was asking about that. So Iceland is another one that I did see earlier on. People were talking about. A lot of people, I guess, on previous things have spoken about Iceland and which cruise line to go to Iceland and so on. And a lot of people talking about Viking, because Viking do some very interesting itineraries around Iceland. Iceland is another one that I would also have, that I have on my bucket list. And I would also recommend people consider putting on the bucket list. And this is maybe linked to another theme, which is around places that are truly remarkable and truly very different to anything that you experience. And Iceland is one of those. So, going to Antarctica, going through the Panama Canal, these things are really unique and different. Iceland is, I think, going to Iceland on a cruise, in my personal opinion, is better than going on a land-based trip. And the reason being is Iceland is this, the ice sort of that shape. And the center of the island is effectively a desert, but it's a very bizarre desert in a way, because it's all basically kind of lava and there's not much in the center, in fact. So all of the main activity on Iceland and all the sort of the residential way people live is around the outskirts of Iceland. So a lot of people who go on a land-based thing, you can actually, sort of try and drive around Iceland. But the advantage of the cruise is it takes you around, all these key places in Iceland, and you get to some incredibly remote places. You get to see all the, the things you would do if you were land-based. You get to go to Reykjavik and the Blue Lagoon, and you go and get to see the geyser and all that kind of stuff. You can easily do those off a cruise, but you get to see very different parts of it. So I did it on voyages to antiquity, and I did it on saga, and I would really like to do the Viking activity. Is very interesting as well. But all of them will normally take you to what they call the Jewels of the North and the Golden Circle. So Golden Circle is out of Reykjavik, and that will take you to a whole bunch of key waterfalls and things. And then the northern one will take you to other bits and incredible, the geysers. I've already mentioned the bubbling. I've forgotten the name of the bubbling mud, sulfur mud. But the great thing about the cruises, you're going to get to see this very diverse part. You get to see the glaciers. I went up on an excursion high up in a glacier. We went walking through the sulfur mud flats. You get to go to the Blue Lagoon, but it is just such a almost freaky kind of place. But the other key thing about going on a cruise is going on a land-based trip to Iceland is phenomenally expensive. Iceland is crazy expensive, so you can also kind of manage that a little bit there. So I think it was Jeffrey and Elaine saying Iceland is on my Iceland is on the bucket list. So here we are, and just talking about, coming back to think about transatlantic crossings. You asked a question a few months ago about the likelihood of transatlantic crossings this November. We're sailing on Regent Splendor in 2 weeks, and I'm so grateful for your optimism. The good news, of course, is that from Monday, the 8th, is when the US is officially it is opening to a number of countries, including the UK, the EU. So many of those repositioning cruises, transatlantics, are setting off. So Sky Princess, I think they sort of on Friday, so yesterday, and as we heard, others are going. I think we've got Seabourn Ovation leaving next week from Lisbon. So they're all kind of going, and the good news is that UK and the EU people are able to go. So that's a good point. Simon making Iceland is a target cruise for 2023. I'd like to visit Faro and the Hebrides on the route. That's a good point, actually. That's a good point, Simon. Is if you're sailing there's two ways to do the Iceland. You either like fly into Iceland and cruise, like Viking do around, or you can sail out of the UK or whatever. And they will tend to, like when I did the Voyage to Antiquity, it was a full round cruise, and we went to parts of the Shetlands, we went to parts of the Faroe Islands, and so on, and you get to see some of that along the way, which is interesting. The reason some of them don't do it is once you head across to Iceland, it can be a little bit bumpy. So that's why I think a lot of people do like to fly in. Yes, we're in the middle of a firework display. Yeah, it does. Unfortunately, it's a combination of two things. Because Diwali is around about now as well, and you've got the Guy Fawkes Day, which was actually officially yesterday, but clearly, I guess people are doing fireworks now. So I apologize for that. So before we get, let me cover some of the general questions, and then we will get into this point. It was last there on Bonfire Night, Guy Fawkes Night, and we little fireworks goes on all weekend. Yeah, it's and also because it ties with the Diwali. So let me just cover a couple of general questions that I've seen popping up, and then we'll come back and talk about some more bucket list cruises. So Richard asked the question, I'm cruising on Royal Caribbean Grand Suite Quantum of the Seas in December. Any tips? To be honest with you, Richard, I don't have many tips because I don't really know Quantum of the Seas incredibly well. The only thing I would say more generally about Royal Caribbean is obviously there is a lot of choice of things to do, some amazing things to do. And one of the things that I always find key with Royal Caribbean is planning and booking ahead. So, making sure you've lined up any of those things that you want to do ahead of time. Now, I don't know, I'm guessing you'll get a lot of those perks anyway, traveling in the Grand Suite, but those people who don't travel in a suite, one of the things that's always looking at, which they put on hold during the pandemic, but they're bringing in, is the key. So the key is a package you can buy, which gets you many of those things like early embarkation, disembarkation, Wi-Fi usage, priority seating. It shows some of those things, and I know they've tweaked those a bit, but certainly take advantage of all those perks that you've got in a suite, because a lot of other people are kind of paying for those. So booking in advance, I think, is really, really key. And I would actually just look at the list, just Google like the key, because that probably gives you a lot of clues on some of the things that you should be doing. So sorry, I couldn't really answer that question as well as I could have. So let's see. There was a couple of other key questions that I've gone around. Some things around. I'm going to pick up. Here we go. Let's have a look. I'll come back to that. Let's talk about Bookhaven. Talking again about cabin choices. I did some people mentioned. I've seen some people mention already in there about. I did a little survey, which I do quite frequently. You may have seen them on the channel, on my community tab on the channel, and asked lots of questions about what people do, what they don't do. So one of them this week was, for example, when do people first go cruising? How old were they when into their first cruise? I was actually in my 40s when I went on my first cruise, but it made up for lost time. Things that which I think this cruise I'm doing now is my 86th cruise. I think I'm right in saying. Obviously, some are 1 or 2 days, some are 2-3 weeks long. What was I talking about? Oh yes, so sorry. So one of the most popular questions I asked, because I did, which has been running, and it's had thousands and thousands and thousands of views and huge amounts of discussion, which it always does, is around cabin choice. And the point that Bookhaven was saying is around doing a world cruise and doing it in terms of going on a balcony. And you're right, I mean, you're going to be on the ship for up to 3 months or so. And although there are people who do an inside cabin, you do kind of, when we did that leg, we did 7 weeks leg of a world cruise, and you start to see the same people kind of always sitting outside, always sitting in the lounge. So anytime they kind of want to escape their inside cabin, they had to go and sit in a public area. So I think you're right, actually, although you may not use it a lot, just having that ability to escape and stuff. But it's very interesting looking at the discussion around cabins, because I think it was about 50% of people were, in the balcony camp, and then it was split equally between the suites, ocean view, inside. Obviously, you get people key on ocean view. I want to do ocean view because I want to do as many cruises as possible, and obviously some people only doing it in suites. So, really, that was quite interesting. Someone's asking the question around changing money on board a ship. Sorry, that's not the right question. I've completely picked up the wrong question. But there was another question there around, I guess, foreign exchange, which I can't find glancing through there, which is around, do ships change money on board? Now, it depends a little bit. I noticed post-pandemic cruises, so and the pandemic's still going on, but post-shutdown cruises, let's call it. Because every time I say post-pandemic, I get a gazillion of comments saying the pandemic isn't finished, which is true. So post-shutdown cruises, I'm seeing cruise lines on the ones I've been on so far, so it'll be interesting to see as it rolls out, not being as keen or not offering as much money exchange on board. I guess maybe they don't want to handle as much cash. So that's one thing to watch overall. But generally speaking, when I've been on cruises, to the person who's asking the question, I've seen that normally you can change currency. You can change currency normally for the port or the countries that you're calling on. So again, using that example, when we did those legs of the world cruise, is what currency you could change sort of evolved a little bit as we headed into different places. The one thing I would say is the rates were terrible, like really terrible. So it's not something I would strongly recommend. I think you probably would find, if you haven't, is it's almost worth looking at taking money out of an ATM in a place, because even though the rates aren't great that you get and you sometimes pay a fee, the rates on the ship are even worse. So because that's not their thing, I guess. So that's one watch out. When we went on that long leg of the cruise, we actually, because with lots of countries, we had Vietnamese dong and all these different Australian dollars and blah 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 blah, and it was a nightmare because we ended up having so much excess currency at the end that we ended up changing and losing on. So I would say, if you're actually cruising on a country that calls on multiple countries, considering that thing about actually just drawing out, paying with a card, because many places take a card, number one. Number two, if you really want local currency, consider the ATM option, or even kind of a bureau de change in the town, not at airports or whatever. Or thirdly, what works a lot, and it doesn't work everywhere, but certainly I found when I was doing more exotic cruises, is US dollars. I found in many places, or most places, with US dollars, you would normally find people would either take them, or you get a relatively good exchange rate on US dollars. So even some of the little local markets, even in obscure places, would be more than happy to negotiate in US dollars. The advantage of doing it in US dollars is also you find you have a much better sense of what you're paying. So when we did that leg of the world cruise, because you get so confused with Vietnamese dong and blah, 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 and all this stuff, is you suddenly realize you're paying ridiculous amounts of money for things. I did it when I was actually on my Mekong River cruise, when I was in, I think it was in Cambodia or something. I got completely confused. And I realized I bought these sunglasses for a ridiculous amount of money because I got confused with how many noughts there were on. So hopefully that sort of answers that question overall. So let's, I'm not sure, I don't know this. What do you know about Nomia Cruise? Is it cheap? And is that for I don't know what that is. So if you maybe expand a little bit more, I'll be able to answer that better. So let's have a look. Piper Nile. Sorry, I keep dropping this piece of paper. I'm going to put it here so it's a little bit there. Is the around the world cruise on your bucket list? So Piper Nile, absolutely 100%. It is on the list. And the plan originally was, Mark and I had originally planned in 2023 that we were going to do a full world cruise. In 2014, we did 4 weeks on Queen Mary 2 of their world cruise leg from Sydney to Dubai. And that got us really excited. We realized being on a ship that long, we didn't want to get off. And it was an amazing experience. And so we went on, altogether it was 10 weeks. In 2016, we did 7 weeks on Queen Victoria from Southampton through the Panama Canal, up through Hawaii, New Zealand to Australia. Got off in Australia, in Sydney, spent some time with our friends there. Then we went to Hong Kong and joined the Queen Elizabeth, which was on its world cruise, and did 3 weeks around Japan. But that made us decide we absolutely wanted to do a world cruise. So we had originally planned to do one sort of 2023. Then a couple of things happened. The pandemic came along, and then actually Mark decided he needed to work longer than he'd hoped to. Come back to discussion around money. He decided he didn't have enough to retire as young as he wanted to. He wanted to retire when he was 50 something, and it wasn't possible because I'm 10 years older than him. So he decided to work longer. And the pandemic, we decided actually we're going to push back the world cruise until we get a real sense of the rhythm. I know lots of world cruises have been cancelled. 2023 looks possible, but still, as we've learned, things are so complicated. Going to Uruguay, for this trip, I'm flying by Madrid onto Uruguay, and then the ship comes back into Argentina. But the logistics of just moving between, because I'm flying, what I have to do to get through just in transit in Madrid, what I have to have, paperwork I have to have, passenger locator, get into Uruguay, which is a whole separate set of rules around what passenger locator form, proof of vaccination, PCR test within a certain time period. Then you have to get on the ship, you have to have another PCR test, because actually the time runs out for the first PCR test. Then getting into Argentina, you have to do passenger locator form plus another PCR test on the ship. Then you have to do passenger locator form and a day 2 test coming back to the UK. So just the logistics and of what you can and can't see, what is open, what isn't open, what the rules are, is we've decided to push the World Cruise back. So anyway, it's a long way of answering your question, Piper, now. But World Cruise absolutely is on the list. And the discussion that we're having around that is, and it comes back to the little question that someone had earlier, is what cruise line, but more importantly, what size ship? Because the World Cruise experience is very different whether you go on sort of a medium size. Now, generally speaking, big ships don't do World Cruises. So the big ships. So it tends to be a smaller ship. So even Royal Caribbean with their 274-night, 9-month World Cruise that they're doing in 24. So it goes in December 23 into 24. They're doing that on, I think, 7 8 of the seas. So not massive ships, because first of all, they can't necessarily fill it to do a world cruise, and also you just can't call on the range of ports that you'd want to do. But anyway, if you go on a mid-sized ship, so you go on a Holland America, New Amsterdam, I'm not sure if they do that, but Queen Elizabeth or Victoria, they do a full circumnavigation. You have a lot of sea days and not that many ports. So you might be on, across 3 months, you might only be calling, say, 20 or 30 ports. So on average, it's like 1 port for every 4 or 5 days. So that's one way of doing it. And they often circumnavigate, or they'll do a whole, go all the way around South America and parts of the Americas and come back. Or you go on a smaller ship, so you might go on an Oceania Insignia, or you'll go on a Seabourn Ovation, or something like, a 600-700 ship, and it's much more port intensive. So that's really the discussion and the trade-off. So the discussion that I'm negotiating at the moment with Mark is, first of all, what year to go, but also then importantly, what is the experience you want? Because obviously, if you're on a ship for 3 months, The average world cruise is about 100 to 120 days. You need to think also about the mix. So the advantage if you go on a bigger ship is you're going to have bigger entertainment. You're going to have a bigger casino, bigger, facilities, perhaps more people around, more going on, more entertainment, more activities. If you're on a smaller ship, you're going to have your 6 singers and some guest entertainers, a small casino, small fitness, that kind of stuff. So it's that balance between those. So absolutely yes. And then, sorry if I went off a little slightly complicated story, but I think that's really, really pretty important when we get down to some of those, some of those things. There's a discussion around pets. So I'm going to come back. I want to come back to Japan in a second. I'm going to come to Japan in a second. Barking Dog, you're right. The only cruise line, I did a video, which was one of my least successful videos I've ever done. My two most least successful videos I've done in the last 2 years. One was about cruising in the environment and what ships are doing, which I discovered cruisers are less interested in what they're doing. They just expect cruise lines to get on with it and whatever was my take for that. I went around how you can actually cruise with the pet. The answer being not many options. And the only one you can really do it is with on Queen Mary 2 on transatlantics, and then your dog is not in your cabin. It's in the kennels. But if you ever want to find out more about cruising and pets, then take a look at that video. Boost the numbers. I think most people are saying they wouldn't go on them, but the only time you're going to see animals in the public areas is very rare, and nowadays it's almost only ever if it's a person who's partly sighted or is blind and has a guide dog. That's the only time that you like to see an animal. You used to sometimes see support animals, service animals, but only the cruise lines have clamped down on that. So Japan is another one that I had on the bucket list. So come back to that 3-week thing. Japan is another place. The reason I have on the bucket list is, first of all, it's an incredible experience, and you get to see, all those things, Nagasaki, Hiroshima, Osaka, for Kyoto, and so on, Okinawa. So you get a lot of history if you're interested in history, particularly the whole Second World War history, and you get to see the whole culture and whatever. And the reason that I think a cruise is a great one of the bucket list, first of all, because you get to see Japan, and secondly, it can be a little bit daunting, although much less so, going to Japan and traveling around Japan a lot as an English speaker, because Japanese language obviously looks very different. It's not that, it didn't used to be as English friendly. It is much more so now. Technology has moved ahead. Actually, the apps are phenomenal. So actually land-based is less so, but going on a cruise around Japan is phenomenal. There's lots of options, and that's definitely one that is absolutely on my list. Jack's asking a question. Any cruises feature cruise-long poker tournaments? Jack, I haven't come across any of those, but what I suspect you're likely to find there's a themed cruise around it, because obviously, poker is such a big thing. There's a big following, professional poker players. So unfortunately, the site that used to be brilliant for looking for themed cruises, which was called Themed Cruise Finder, hasn't gone. So I literally think you just have to Google poker tournaments, cruises. I feel like they kind of has to. I feel like there has to be them. Let me answer this question, James, and then I'm going to come back to some of the other on the bucket list cruise. Will Americans who booked a cruise out of Southampton in April 2022, will Americans be allowed to cruise for Southampton then? I think I'm right in saying, James, that yes. I think you're already allowed to cruise on cruises out of the UK. That initial rule was in place on many of the cruise lines for the initial startup cruises. As cruise lines have now moved into their international cruising, that is the case. So, for example, the repositioning cruises that are sailing have many nationalities on them. So Sky Princess, which sailed out, has Americans, UK, EU people, and so on and so forth. Of course, double check with the line, but certainly those rules were in place for those specific startup cruises only. So that was that. So James, I'm going to touch this, and I'm going to come on to the list before we finish. So I enjoy your videos very much, which is fantastic to hear. I noticed there are several cruise lines you really talk about. Can you tell us why you avoid certain lines? Yes, I can talk about that. So there's two reasons that I talk about, maybe three reasons, that there are some lines I talk about relatively infrequently. One of which is because I have no or limited experience of those cruise lines. So, for example, Regent Seven Seas is one that I talk about, not in any amount of detail. I'll talk about in the context of luxury cruising. So my video from last week around luxury cruising, I will talk about Regent Seven Seas. I've toured the ships, but I haven't done a lot of cruising on them. So it may be, sometimes it's around that. So I haven't been, for example, someone was talking about earlier, like uncruise cruises I haven't been on, or I haven't been on Sea Dream. So I tend to talk about those a little bit less because I don't have as much experience of those. So I'll talk them in the context of a category or a destination. Secondly, it's a cruise line that I'm not a big fan of, or not for me. So I do tend, I guess, on the channel to talk about cruises and cruise lines that I think people who will be interested in the same things that I am interested in may talk about. So I try to talk about them more, but I sometimes forget. So I tend not to talk. I'm guessing the cruise lines you may be talking about that and talking about. So like Royal Caribbean, Norwegian Cruise Line, and things like that. I try to talk about more than I do, and I try to remind myself to talk about them much more. I find often the videos that I'm doing don't actually focus a lot on those lines specifically, and I'm trying to do much more of that, particularly because there's lots of developments. So that's the second reason. The third reason is also there may be lines that I'm not a big fan of, like P&O Cruises or MSC Cruises, either because I don't rate them as a line or I have reservations about the way they do things. So maybe I should make a video, actually, because I think someone may want to have touched on it before. Maybe it'd be a good video to talk about is like, why don't I talk about some lines? So maybe I will do that. Might be good. So I'm talking about Regent and so on. So let me quickly talk about, and I'm just going to touch on some of the other cruises that we haven't touched on in terms that are on my bucket list. And so Queen Mary 2 Transatlantic we spoke about. Another one which I would strongly recommend everybody takes a look at is French Polynesian Islands and Tahiti. One of the most phenomenal cruises I've ever done was with Paul Gauguin, which is actually now owned by Ponant, around French Polynesian Islands. The danger with that is, or the problem with that is, it's very far away. Even if you're in the US, it's very far away from Europe, and it's extremely expensive. So it has to be one of those things that's probably lower on the list, and you're doing it for very specific reasons. And the other one, which we didn't touch on, so we spoke about Queen Mary 2, French Polynesian Islands, a polar cruise, Alaska, Galapagos, Mekong River, Panama Canal, Japan, Iceland we've spoken about. And the other one that we touched on a little bit, which is Norwegian Fjord, so slightly cheating there. And the Nile is another one that I have on my bucket list. I don't have it on the bucket list yet because I need to go back. I've only done Nile as a land-based. The Mississippi is another one that I've got on my personal bucket list, but I'm not recommending that for everybody because I haven't done that yet. But also circumnavigating Australia is another incredible experience, the diversity of Australia. And again, Australia is a bit like Iceland, as I was saying. If you look at Australia, you've got this, the red center, which has basically got nobody in. You've got Alice Springs and stuff like that. And then all the interesting places where people live is around the outside. So actually a cruise is phenomenal. You go to Sydney, Brisbane, and the Gold Coast. You go up to Darwin. So you go to Cairns for the Barrier Reef. You go up to Darwin, which is a fascinating place. You can go to the Kimberley. You can go down to Broome, go to Perth and Fremantle. You can go to Melbourne, you can go to Kangaroo Island. So circumnavigation Australia is another one that I would strongly recommend in terms of the list. So I can just touch very briefly on this. I'll talk, Heather, in much more detail when I come back from Antarctica. So how much was your flight to Uruguay, and was it included in your cruise fare? Or did you have to pay for it separately? I'll get to much more about the logistics of that when I come back here. But basically, I actually did it. I did this particular cruise where I booked the cruise only, and I booked the flight separately. And that worked out quite well, partly because the original cruise I'd booked was a slightly different cruise, actually, although we're still going out of Montevideo, and it all got chopped and changed. At that point, I was very much focused on booking packages myself, often because I was using air miles, to be honest, with many of these cruises, because I was booking so far ahead, have so many air miles from trips I've done over time that I often were using air miles to do flights. So my original plan wasn't to buy it. I can't remember offhand how much our flight to Uruguay was, because flying to Uruguay, fly back, I think I'm right in saying it was, because I booked it in a business class flight because it was a really long haul. I think it was about £2,000. So that's about $2,500, $2,600. So quite an expensive trip. But I will talk a little bit more about that because Ponant we're offering bundling. I'm much more like I work with Sarah now with Polar Routes, looking much more at what are the cruise flights. So for example, we discovered something I was booking just yesterday with Sarah. We were looking at, and actually the flight was £500, so like $750 more expensive than booking it ourselves, booking myself, directly. So playing around and working out who has the best kind of deals. A lot of people asking some questions around traveling with various mobility needs, etc. I will also cover, because I've been asked to do a video in depth, which I'm starting to work on that. So I apologize I haven't asked that question. Maybe I'll do actually a live stream or focus on that much more, but it's a bigger topic than probably got time for to do it right now. So I'm sorry that I didn't get to that question. I'm doing a video and I will talk about that. So while we've kind of charged through everything, just to remind you two things. One, I have a video coming out tomorrow night, which is about European river cruising. No one warned me about it, a little dramatic there, but talking about European river cruising. So that's coming out tomorrow night, 6 p.m., whatever time that's going to be in the US. We will not have a live stream until the 3rd of December. So I hope you have a very safe, wonderful time. Hopefully, if you want to follow me, I'll try and post some stuff on YouTube. Certainly on Instagram, depending on Wi-Fi, I will also post some stories there. So have a great 3 weeks or so. Don't miss me too much. And thanks so much to many hundreds of you who joined the live stream, and have a great rest of your weekend and have a great 3 weeks.